Hello and welcome to the Utah Poetry Festival 2022. I'm Paisley Rectal, your state poet laureate and this evening's host. I'm delighted to conclude this weekend's core festival events with tonight's headline reading. I'd like to acknowledge that this event is taking place virtually on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes, and that Utah is home to 8 distinct tribal nations. Before turning this over to our readers, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums and the Utah Humanities Council for making these events possible. I'd also like to thank tonight's ASL interpreter, Kim Hawker, for making our event more accessible. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you out there for coming and supporting poetry this weekend. If you are interested in more poetry events taking place this National Poetry Month, all of April, you can find them on our website, www.utahpoetryfestival.com, which I'll put in the chat. It will include all events that are going on statewide the rest of this month. All registration and location information can be found via this link. Tonight's speakers have books out, brand new books, and we have a wonderful virtual book fair going on. I'll be putting the link to our book fair into the chat throughout the session to heckle you gently to support our wonderful poets by purchasing their books. You do not want to miss these new collections. Our readers tonight will perform alphabetically. I will read their bios in the order of their appearance, or I should say I will read them one by one before they come on the stage. And of course, we will turn the screen over first to John Belk, then I will introduce Danielle Dubrasky, and she will come on, and finally I will introduce Nancy Takacs, and she will come on. I urge all of you out there in Zoom land to use the chat to sing their praises and to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions, since we might have a little time at the end of these readings for a quick chat between the poets. That's the housekeeping for this evening. So I will begin by reading a performer's bios, I should say the first bio of our first performer tonight. Our first reader is John Belk. John Belk is an associate professor of English at Southern Utah University and the author of the chapbook, The Weathering of Igneous Rock Forms in High Altitude Riparian Environments. Okay, that is like the best title ever. His poems have recently appeared in Jet Fuel Review, The Main Review, Fourth River, Poems to Go, Sugar House Review, Salt Hill, Poetry South, Crab Orchard Review, and Sport Literate, among others. He is also a researcher whose scholarship examines the historical ways that poetry has helped create social change. His articles can be found in Rhetoric Review, Rhetoric Society Quarterly, Composition Forum, and edited anthologies. John holds degrees in English and history from Texas A&M University and received his MFA in poetry and PhD in rhetoric and composition from Pennsylvania State University. He lives in Cedar City, Utah. Welcome to John Belk.
Thank you, Paisley. So I'm going to be reading from my new book, The Gardens of Our Childhoods, which is just out from Autumn House Press. It was selected as by Matthew Dickman as the 2021 Autumn House Rising Writer Prize. So, and a few weeks ago, I was at AWP and I was talking with the fiction writer, Jen Fox, and I was explaining the book to her and she was like, oh, so it's a concept album about professional wrestling. And so I'm just going to steal that elevator pitch. And that's what I'll be reading from tonight is my concept album about professional wrestling. And the first poem I'm going to read is called Trash. My allotment at the garden used to fill with flotsam, bottles, paper towels, knives, an empty can of beer. In 1997, Hulk Hogan turned heel. The fans threw trash, chili dogs and spoiled milk and Pilsner. Pilloried rage, just like every year at Thanksgiving when Uncle, sad-voiced and serious, would say, aren't you too old for this wrestling trash? And isn't that a metaphor? Every thin relationship and fallen hero, trash and a garden, wrestling, Hollywood Hogan, and holiday dinners at home. The next poem I'm going to read is titled Perry Saturn Makes Ends Meet after a failed tour with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Perry Saturn was one of my favorite wrestlers growing up. And so he kind of has this fictionalized sequence throughout the book. In the solar fields past Barstow, Perry collects birds. Every morning, stemmed and unconcerned, he wears a welder's apron and work boots, walks among panels 2 hours at a time, scooping remains of avian frames caught between tower and ground. He smells of cedar and earth, pungent body oil and leather and salt. Each bird is a cloud at the edge of apocalypse, carbon black, lit with fire. Perry scoops them into buckets, carries them off. Each one, he thinks, is a sorry metaphor. Perry takes lunch on a support girder of Ivanpah Solar Tower 2, carefully unwraps a dry turkey club with tomato. The plant powers 2 telescopes and half the Golden Valley. Underground are solenoids and valves, tanks of molten salt that store the sun. This is what a star looks like up close. Perry puts the remains of a California gull in his bucket. One of its eyes is still knowable, its burnt breast wearing the bulk of its trauma. For a moment, he wants to return it to the beach, dip it in the soft Pacific, and be forgiven for breaking his mother's heart. He shakes the thought. In a bathroom that smells of cooked meat and acetone, he re-ups and daydreams of high school and a time when he wasn't lonely, and stardust and beach grit and flight and some far-off future, some other world of swirling color and undivided light. The next poem is called The Death of Owen Hart. Here was a man beloved. Even the worst in the business mourned for Owen Hart. If a man has enemies in life, they are often buried by death, but Owen made genuine sorrow grow from the most hard-packed of soil. I was a melancholy boy for sure, but loved, so I suppose I relate. It seems that life is a pity's wheel for losing, especially for melancholy boys. Losing coins, loved ones, a thimble of resolve. I lost my language once, drunk. I lost lovers no more or less than most, and friends. When I was very small, I lost a tin man in the dirt beneath my mother's favorite tree. How much have I lost, and how? Sitting in my garden, shoveling turnips into buckets for the winter. And how should I mourn? One more fallen, stunted, rolled aside to the fallow edge where stone becomes grass, and beyond, a host of mothers singing, their voices carried in endless open fields. The next poem is part of another sequence throughout the book of kind of bar trivia poems. And this one is titled Bar Trivia, No Wrestler Has Ever Used an Annie Lennox Song as Entry Music. If they had, we would know such human capacity for love, intimate breaths on a neck in moonlight, the name of a favorite doll. Because who would expect a large man born of noon sun and sinew to be delicate? And who would hold his hand, a lengthened torch, cottage lace, a saw, and a set of pastels? Interrupted Astor. No wrestler has ever used an Annie Lennox song as entry music for fear the whole world might weep, split apart at its belt, whistle its conscience to make itself cry. And this poem, all right, this poem might be my favorite in the collection, so I'll let you all in on the secret since you are my fellow Utahns. It's called Angle of Regard. The best angles in wrestling come out of nowhere. Scott Hall waltzing from the crowd, toothpick on his lip and a shit-eating bad guy grin. It's like the first time someone kissed you. How she caught you off guard in the moonlight outside of your parents' house. How the persimmon smell blown up off her neck was a leaf strung taut in a tree made for climbing. How every moment of hurt the next 20 years would float in that tree, pulled up up into a warm Sunday night in the northernest part of North Louisiana, and you, just there, 16, shit-eating grin, knowing nothing of another person's heart. How each person's heart is a tree ever and growing and galled to the touch. How sometimes, from the right angle, under the right shape of moon, when the air smells slight of persimmon, you can see so far. We've got another Perry Saturn poem here. Perry Saturn fell in love with a mop. Perry bought a pair of linen curtains too long to dress the sliding glass door. He thought he was in love with them. He once loved a turtle, a fish, the ocean on its side when it was sleeping. He loved a girl, a few even, but never like the first. He loves better now. Still, there are breaths we cannot keep. Another heart opens for a time, and we bathe soft in another life, tangled in curtains, carmine tressed and a tart curl of lip, oyster freckled, happy. We dance with a painted mop head like an ancient fool, a wrestler, a well-dressed open glass door inviting us into the day. Next poem is titled Madison Square, and it kind of brings together a lot of the thematic threads of the book, gardens and wrestling and space travel and mothers. So that's the setup for this one. Madison Square. In the beginning, the garden was an ice rink leased to P.T. Barnum. In 1898, Nikola Tesla demonstrated the first remote-controlled robot to cheers, and in 1925, the first ring debuted in a light heavyweight bout between Berlenbach and Delaney. The first WrestleMania was held there too. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, the Iron Sheik. Oh, to be present for history. The roar of the crowd, an ocean on a faraway world, a palace, a grand purple desert under pale milk stars. Why do we like a fight? The spectacle, the violence on the floor. Somewhere a mother holds her grown son for the first time in many years. She braids his hair like he is 8 again, dreams of slowing time. Somewhere a pulsar wind nebula turns around a dying neutron star. A boy lifts weights in a garage in South Georgia, draws pictures of things he can see in the sky at night. In a garden somewhere, everything folds together. A crowd erupts at a shooting star press. A man picks flowers for his mother, fleeting and superluminal, or something beautiful, made by a boy with all his heart. And then this poem is probably the most Utah poem in the collection. It's titled Fan Letters. And it was written while I was staying in the artist's cabin right in Zion Canyon. And in that cabin is a collection of a bunch of David Flanagan's letters, who was one of the pioneers who settled in the canyon. And I'm an archival researcher for my day job, and so I can't resist going through people's private letters. So this is a poem inspired by those letters that steals a couple of lines from them. Fan letters. David Flanagan built the first transit cable from the rim of Zion Canyon, used it to zip lumber from the eastern plateau woodlands to the settlers below. One can still see the mechanism today, perched atop the canyon like a burnt gull. David writes of it in letters, whisked away by the selfsame wire, up and beyond into thin desert sky, above ranging trails where he wrestled with cousins, faith, low-hanging branches of limber pine. The breath of all things, wild and vinegar full, hangs in epistles, Galatians, Ephesians, a blue-sealed reminiscence of youth. In letters, David meditates on how a canyon and an envelope both could seem of God. Perhaps because temples can be made of most anything. Perhaps because words stuck in a throat feel just the same as a stone. Perhaps because thy presence inspires thought, and with thought comes regret, remorse, and suffering. Amen. And then I'll wrap up with a happy poem. For once, the best option is the easiest option. It costs nothing to hold a door, to believe that each person root-bound to the forest floors and beaches of this odd, great world deserves to have their hair brushed, to be told that there is no one else quite like them in the perfect confluence of things, that strange happenings make for good lives, joy and anger, school dances and silly dreams, movie popcorn, moon butter, heartache and blue-lit stars that heave soft like sleeping rabbits, perfectly warm to touch. For once, the best option is the easiest. We love each other as best we can in all our failure. On days we cannot bear the skin of our own imperfect forms, we build campfires, sing, forgive ourselves such unlikely blessing that we should be here now, faultless, shrouded in grace and beautiful, making all our mothers proud. Thank you.
That was just beautiful. I love that so much. Thank you so much, John. We are going to move to our next reader, Danielle Debraski. But before we do that, I do want to remind you, if you love those poems, and how could you not, we have a virtual book fair and they are for sale. So you can go up in the chat. I will put this back in the chat so you can easily find a link to John's new book. Congratulations. So Danielle Dubrasky is the author of the full-length poetry collection Drift Migration, recently published by Ashland Poetry Press, the chapbook Ruin and Light, and the limited edition letterpress art book Invisible Shores, published by Red Butte Press, which is really quite gorgeous. Her poems have appeared in Chiron Review, Ninth Letter, Terrain.org, Pilgrimage, Sugar House Review, Cave Wall, South Dakota Review, and elsewhere. Her essay, Juliet, won the 2020 Mississippi Review Nonfiction Prize. She is a professor of English and creative writing at Southern Utah University, where she directs an eco-poetry and place writing conference. She's conducted poetry writing workshops on metaphors and symbolic landscapes and led writing workshops at the national parks. Danielle has also developed a curriculum of poetry writing exercises to be used in poetry therapy groups, published in Journal of Poetry Therapy. She has been a 3-time fellow at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, a 2-time recipient of the Utah Arts Council First Place Award in Poetry, a recipient of an artist scholarship from the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, and is currently the director of the Grace A. Tanner Center for Human Values at Southern Utah University. Danielle grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, but has lived the last 20 years in Southern Utah. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you, Paisley, and the Utah Poetry Festival for setting up this reading. It's a pleasure to read with my good friends, John Belk and Nancy Tuckus. As was mentioned, the title of my book, Drift Migration, it refers to a phenomenon when a bird is blown off course by a gust of wind and separated from its flock. And as I was putting these poems together, I put together various poems that refer to myth, landscape, loss, and renewal. But the first poem is kind of an introduction to the whole concept of journey. And the poem is called Phosphines. And phosphines is a term that refers to those strange glints of light or color you sometimes see behind your eyelids when your eyes are closed. Phosphines. Close your eyes and they will soon appear, small flashes floating in shadow, as if you dove below the photic zone, where sunlight can't reach and lanternfish send signals through bioluminescent scales. Sometimes you see tunnels of green or yellow that spin you through halos until you catch a helix unraveling into ballet, starlings and murmuration over fields in autumn. It has been called the prisoner's cinema, The brain's trick after days of four-walled darkness. Phantom light projected by cells firing into the retina. Sighted by astronauts, pilots, truck drivers, an aurora borealis or blizzard from the optic nerve. Thick flakes pelt the windshield as the road narrows. You disappear around a curve through the only passage you have ever known. These next two poems are about the loss of a sibling and the return of that sibling through memory. And as was mentioned, I direct an eco-poetry conference in Cedar City each fall. And I'm also interested in the healing aspects of poetry. And for me, that healing image is generally seen through images of the natural world. So this is the poem, Drift Migration. Mother calms us with the story of two children who live on a floating island. In a glass-bottom boat, they sail over anemones and sea urchins to a coral reef where stingrays glide along the riffle, translucent medusas with the low tide, their tentacles in seaweed. Our hands cramped around scissors, we cut out paper accordions of a girl and a boy. My brother draws blue waves with a crayon and a boat. A billboard, Stardust Motel, the exit sign, Valley of Fire. Sand and creosote, broken bottles sparkling before his head smashes the windshield near rows of telephone poles. His name thrives in a desert as open as the sky that rains down dry-throated gullies, soaks cleft mudflats. His name lies flat on the grass near a copper vase filled with flowers, where the road ends in wind and Joshua trees. I imagine him pulling a black vinyl album from its case, Rust Never Sleeps. Bats fly on the only night I play his songs. The only night the bats move in quadrangles. The floor tilts toward me, sways into water, and I see him sail past the coral reef to our own island. Proteus Cabinet. And that term refers to the cabinet that magicians use for disappearing tricks. Two children slosh muddy keds in water, unearth salamanders that burrow webbed toes in silt. The boy will leave behind his smile in branches when their mother calls them for supper, baking bread, forgetting the salt. They watch fireflies wink in the backyard woods, bottle the light, snuffed out by morning. It was not as though the sister turned away and her brother was gone through the wardrobe, but that morning, the salamander spread its toes deep and would not come out. There was no salamander, only a creek and a brother. Open the window to let in the sky. He will still be there when you go looking. So continuing on with that idea of a little bit of eco-poetry and the healing image. These next two poems are ones on which I was imagining creatures that are resilient despite their conditions. And in this first poem, it's called Sepulveda Basin Refuge, referring to a bird refuge in Los Angeles. This was a scene that I saw pretty much exactly. They congregate along the lake's shoreline, snowy egrets, coots, and grebes, used to the noise from the large, loud birds out of LAX that manage to fly so high. A leaf blower scatters dry sycamore leaves along the footpath, roaring over the only sign of winter in Los Angeles, and someone's model airplane whines in the air. Beer cans, bottles, plastic bags jam a creek below the asphalt trail. Scraps of white paper crumple like tiny cranes in the mud. A blue heron finds a rivulet, rests her leg. And then this poem is Winter Solstice in the Gorge. Our myths turn long nights into cut evergreen, sold on grocery store parking lots, a continent away from reindeer starving as the Arctic ice dissolves. Only one star guides the way for diesels lit like Christmas, miles of commerce that thread the Mojave. The longest night spills from a cup of tears I drink through this highway, that weaves between monoliths of an American Stonehenge along the Virgin River's winding course. At the hour's cusp, I see her face in the rock, Freya, who carries the sun in antlers. She spins a wheel around our breath, seeds the earth with bits of amber. At dawn, the sun stands still on the plateau of Kaibab sediment, reaches its rays down gypsum layers, touches sandstone near bighorn sheep who step out of shadow. So these next few poems, and I'll read these poems in sets, but this next set of poems, I consider the idea of place and displacement through images of contrasting landscapes and Utah's ancient seas. And this is called Leaving Virginia. Utah houses soften their angles at dusk. Hollyhocks blend with the larkspur. Women disappear behind graciousness, a smile that tells nothing. Their shadows stretch in the twilight that darkens a kitchen window. They sweep out corners, holding the wand of a broom. Sand skims the patio beneath the mirage of white dogwood petals. I seem on the edge of everything. The Mojave spread out to the west, beyond the grid streets of a Mormon town. My first night in the desert, stars that had only glimpsed through a humid gaze, now glitter bright as ice. And these sets of poems are from the last section of my book called Vespers in the Great Basin, and Vespers referring to Venus, to the notion of evensong, and also the evening star. And this poem is called Venus. My grandmother watched one blue afternoon, huge waves roll toward the rocks in Monterey Bay, lunge over the 40-foot seawall, break at beds of ice plant, the surge flooding the road, spray striking her window in the cottage she bought when Cannery Row was still a cannery. A few hours later, police stopped to tell her an earthquake hit Alaska and sent a tsunami to Pacific Grove. She never got word it was too dangerous to stay. 50 years later, on my walk along the seawall, clouds brood over black water, splashing rocks where boat lights plumb the surface below the cliff, and otters sway in their sleep on kelp beds. She said it was the most beautiful thing she had seen, a wave traveling for miles to break shells at her doorstep. And then these last two poems refer to the invisible ancient sea of Utah. Retrieval. Air in the empty chambers of the ammonite gives it buoyancy for swimming until it settles in sediment as the Kaibab Sea shrinks from the Great Basin that is so deep, its rocks and shells will never reach the ocean. The ocean will have to come to them, pouring over the rim when the West Coast sinks into depths that flood the Mojave. In another epic, creatures in limestone will taste this new salt, abrading their locked beds, a trail toward home. Great Basin. I am no nearer to what the sea tries to loosen wedged in rock. A sorrow slipped between a trapped metal cap and glass shattered along another coast. The truth is, I don't live near the ocean, but in a desert town I refuse to see, built on an alluvial fan of gypsum soil, shifting beneath cracked plaster and skewed door frames, beneath miles of silver sage, rabbit brush, dry lakes, and wind trembling through pinyon rooted along the highway that stretches through Paiute land. I leave my own trace, planting wisteria, honeysuckle, southern foreigners thirsting for water. I blink and the town is gone, drowned in a sea of fossils. What that sea left behind is the desert I walked through, a sorrow slipped between trilobites and shale. So these last two, I've got two last sets, and this second to last set, it uses a persona to describe distances in relationships between people, spatial distance, emotional distance, distance in terms of time, and also the idea of the past kind of coming up against the present. So this first one is called All Fever Gone. A storm over sandstone hoodoos obscured Bryce Canyon's sharp blue sky. We sheltered in a rock above black clouds, our shirts soaked with rain, your lips browsing the nape of my neck. Then thunder flashed. We never knew how close lightning struck. The others waited inside the lodge, your sister, her fiancé. At her wedding, we slipped away past the gazebo, disappeared into trees like deer, like foxes, skipped over river rocks and lay on the other side until the night shed cold stars. We returned for toast, dancing, cutting of the cake, when her husband smashed red velvet into her mouth, licked it off. Years later, we meet off I-15 at Fort Deseret, take photos of each other in door frames of old dugouts, adjusting apertures for light. This is the country where I remain, all fever gone, or slipped between volcanic peaks and Triassic hills into a land charted by arches, pinnacles, layers of epic old lava and basalt. In the matte print, you lean your shoulder against adobe walls. Behind your smile, the miles of desert beyond the Confusion Range reach the Nevada border and reach me 30 years later, putting dishes away. This is Vespers in the Great Basin. Bald eagles gather among the elms with soft whistles as they glide over snowfields of thistle and jackrabbits, settle on branches, umber wings folded against their bodies, albino heads tucked from the wind. Each winter we watch them fly across the valley to this empty ranch, stretch their wingspan beyond 6 feet, their darkness growing in sunset until Venus appears in the west. Driving home, your right hand fumbles with my fingers as if with a rosary, while your left keeps the wheel in check. Out the window, I see a brown quarter horse lean against a fence in snow, haunches turned to the wind. Our silence meets the coldness that blows in through door jambs, the chimney. Next January, when mountain peaks glisten beneath miters of ice, we'll return to the elms as eagles gather across the river and Riven Valley. They'll hunch together on racked branches of winter trees, still believing they can keep the cold at bay. The Glassblower. We follow the Spanish Trail past Bunkerville, a town that harbored fallout to its bones, a road that dips and rises along hills, then crosses I-15 and disappears north to Caliente, where we look out the window at miles strung between telephone poles. Years have narrowed our eyes into the couple at the casino breakfast who study laminated menus to order the Deuces special, 2 eggs, 2 slices of bacon, 2 sausage links, 2 pancakes. We don't say a word while we eat. The asphalt glints of mirages, and we are sure that if we just drive over the next crest, there will be an oasis clear enough to drink. The setting sun turns the hematite of red hills molten in its crucible, spins shells of animals long since gone into sandstone. I remember in high school the artist at the mall who shaped molten glass into cats curled on a mirror or deer grazing suburban shelves. Each week I return to choose a different hand-spun creature. The menagerie still sleeps in bubble wrap, rabbits, lambs, foxes, stored in our basement near volcanic glass collected from dormant peaks. We walk a labyrinth west of town, place our old selves at the center, retrace the path out the rock circle, and face renewal across a playa of an ancient shoreline. And these last 2 poems continue on with the southwest landscape. They're called Evensong and Petroglyphs at Parowan Gap. Evensong. Sunbeams scatter through oxygen and nitrogen, bending frequencies into a band of blue, gray, and white, swallowed by waves of nautical twilight, The moment Venus appears next to Algol, the demon star, and Lambda, astral boat lights floating on the January horizon. I fly over arteries of lights in a Brasilia, tilt to one side along the Buckhorn Flats. Home is scattered. Red cliffs to the east, a dry basin to the west, and in between a town of 3 exits where I have lived out the same day for 30 years. A glossy magazine promises vacations to Denmark, Bali, Alaska, where ocean beats the shores with breakers from our first breaths before our lidless eyes could no longer see through water. At a wind gap, symbols on rock carved by Fremont Indians tell of the equinox, tell of rain, a journey, a woman giving birth. Flat clouds signal a storm building in Nevada that will reach us by tomorrow night. And then finally, petroglyphs at Parowan Gap. All things crisscross before they disappear into a silence throbbing between jutted rocks. A trucker drives on a road perpendicular to the wind gap, visible for a moment, then gone. A Pontiac guns from the closest town swerves toward me, honks, and the men spin away, laugh at my startled jump. I give them the finger. We break the reverie summoned from eons of layers that streak rock masked with graffiti. Names trespass a map carved 5 centuries ago in sandstone. Notches, ladders, a sun circle of concentric rings that give passage to the next traveler. If we live in dreams, our eyes opening and closing to vistas we create, unless we step into someone else's meditation, then which ancient one dreamt this intersection of lines, the distant trucker, the men, and myself, who wander past the length of road into spirals so carefully engraved? Our crossing notches a groove in my palm, a new map I now see in my hands. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for that. It's a great evening of poetry that really is considering landscape in all of these different ways. And I just am so excited to hear our last reader for the night, Nancy Tuckus. And before wait, there it goes. Of course, it's hard to pull up all of these things at the same time. We'll have I think there's a great question in the chat at some point I think we should all talk about, because the question of place is something that all 3 of you are thinking about. Nancy Tuckus started college as a watercolorist and songwriter. She discovered poetry in a sophomore creative writing class and went on to attend the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, earning an MFA in poetry. Living on her husband's family's farm wildlife refuge in Ohio, she felt a strong connection to it and began writing about it before moving in 1983 to Carbon County, where she still lives and continues to be drawn to nature and the outdoors. The recipient of many awards, including the 2018 and 2016 15 Bites Book Award, and author of several books of poems. Nancy is an emerita professor at USU Eastern CEU. She began a memory cafe in 2019 for poetry lovers who have memory loss, and for many years has taught a weekly poetry workshop to poets of all ages in Carbon County. She is currently the inaugural Poet Laureate of Helper City, Utah. Her book, The Worrier, received the Juniper Prize. Her new book, Dearest Water, addresses the love of water in its many forms and our concern with drought. Please welcome Nancy.
Thank you so much, Paisley. I'm happy to be reading with Danny, whom I've known for many years, and I'm really happy also to hear you, John. Loved your poetry. Great readings, both of you. As Paisley mentioned, many of the poems in Dearest Water relate to water or the lack of it. I grew up on the East Coast and moved to Utah in 1978. So I've been here a long time. And I've learned to not take water for granted, of course, as we all have. I love the landscape so much in Utah, as you guys do too, I'm sure. What has been carved out and created by water and left for us to just enjoy. I'm going to read a few shorter poems, and then I'm going to move to a long poem. So the last poem I'll read is called Drought. The first one is called Why I Became Black Dragon Canyon. And many of you may be familiar with this canyon in the swell. Why I Became Black Dragon Canyon. I needed the spit of crow wings, a heron flapping in tree pose on my shoulder, a cougar on alert under my pinions. I needed sun to scheme through my bodies, the beige earth of my openings, the wind to shear off chips of me, then amethyst my bones. I wanted to be carved out of aimlessness. I needed my other side to finally shadow me, shuck me as I waited in silence for the manna of planets, the icy blossoms of stars. I needed paintbrush and mallow to whisk up through my toes. I wanted a waterfall for grasses to thicken, be green, then go gray at my knees. I needed to let my faces become varnished persimmon. I wanted to drink rain from my own stones. I needed that juniper to brush me. The next poem is for all of you Joni Mitchell fans. I have a history with playing Joni Mitchell songs, and I'm taking up the guitar again. And it's called I Still Have a Voice. Why do I wait to separate jewelry that lives in tangled knots till I want my lucky peridot necklace? When I wear it, I feel like Joni Mitchell again, belting out Ladies of the Canyon so my don't tread on me neighbor can hear. Always in the background, my voice told the alto in 6th grade for funeral masses, or hum stream in a 3-woman chorus and climb every mountain, until I took up guitar after my boyfriend, golden-haired James, plucked his twangy 12-string, and I fell in love with the way he sang Wild Horses and knew it was for me. Solo, I trilled Joni's silver notes in blue, wrote songs I performed a cappella with Marianne on our college radio, lambasting the Vietnam War until her father called the station and had the tape destroyed. So I opened my jewelry box that smells of tarnished silver and my aunt's lilac-scented powder. She died without singing much, left me her ring, a turquoise necklace, and lots of chains. I should untangle her gold chains, maybe turn them in for cash. I could use a nice set of watercolors to swish crimson, gold green, ultramarine with lots of water on the page and watch a figure emerge from the drift like the spooky head of a parrot or a fish flipping in a pink dusk. I slipped my guitar under my breast again and blew my voice, not quite having Joni's verve and range and beauty, but I'm glad I still have it. Can still wing a case of you. Oh, you're in my blood like holy wine. You taste so bitter and so sweet. Oh, I could drink a case of you, darling. Still, I'd be on my feet. I would still be on my feet. Wearing my peridot necklace, making chords swim over my craggy picking, feeling this music more luminous than my aunt's star sapphire, more like sudden watercolor pines, while my own new song is feathering out from the wet paper. The next poem is Cilantro. for my husband. So it's a love poem. In my garden's abundant light, cilantro lifts its flickering scent of celery and mint. Such gentle spines from tiny black seeds he hid under my pillow in their elegant packet. When I part the row with my ankles, fronds open their eyes, their mouths. Garden of cilantro in the desert, radiant in their bed. Menage a trois of the tomato, the onion, cilantro's carnal teeth of tranquility. And later, with leaves on the cutting board, I am dappled, sashaying to an otherworldly sea. I am the lemony pine on a starved tongue. When I mince them into the turquoise bowl, they tell the truth about jewels of asparagus, juices of blue stem grass, the mazes of our long love. New Year poem. What nourishes the violets before they tremble open? What brushes a burrowing snake, the whittled secrets on its tail? What kick do we get from a pear that balms us? What is this tidy sienna when we've requested a fire engine of geranium? What sweeps the mountain like a fickle sponge? What blames a circus of cirrus? What is serious? What beetle wanders in this necklace? What needs some ochre in every ghost town? What blossom balances in a hollow ear? What wrong tides have loved us? What moon in the crabapple has loved us? What eye has held us? Eating at the pier. Scallops have 200 eyes, and here I am sticking a fork into one, my tongue running over the soft groove where the cook pulled the ligament as I eye the serene green backs of the Apostle Islands, hear what sounds like a whooping crane. We've come so far as to guide the cranes with an ultralight 1,000 miles back to their nests. Sometimes we can be earnest in saving an animal, for even one to have babies. We recognize wildness, but not usually in ourselves. There are no verses here for man or woman who's boiled a live lobster. The sky is so clear, it will soon be irised with stars, and we'll immediately think of heaven, of eyes. We're civilized. Eyes watch us from the sky, the tanks, the deep. I swallow another scallop, maybe the last eyes I will ever eat. And this is the final poem. That's the long poem I was telling you about. It's in the last section of the book called Notes to God from County Road H. And it's addressed to the Christian God that I grew up with as a Catholic. And I guess it addresses many things, but climate change is important in this poem, as well as drought. The two are linked. I think you are here somewhere, where oceans of stars once fell into orbit and rolled up on the shore of the skies, and grew where they died and blew up, seeding in gas to make some new suns. You could be the space roar, the red swirl of Jupiter's storm, the alien star, or that crab who lives on Mars. This morning, I want to keep the rosy light that surfs in the violet, two flickers of cream that know what they will become as the sky reels in its cup of flowers and I walk out beneath it all, in this skin I bear and love. I watch the soft mouths of range cows in the hot desert, eating the last bale of alfalfa. They are black, so beautifully black, breaths wet and green as they sway toward my empty hands. I watch a pair of finches who follow me to where I wash my hands. Quiet finches, good-looking ones who flutter in my runoff. I watch a horse in my neighbor's small field, the one I have brought a pair to, all white with a half moon that cups her left eye. She gets wild when the trailer comes. She'll ride to 9 Mile Canyon to live for the summer between sky and sage and juniper. The poet loves texture and wicked drama. She wants the scent of sunrise in cadmium yellow on her paper. She wants the blue hip of a mountain, the white gold of a blossom, the bee inside the crystal of a frozen tulip. She believes in the ancient furnace, the bitter orange in the fridge. She opens an envelope to a small credit that saves her. The poet wants to hold a water hyacinth inside the creek of her heart. She touches a watercolor brush and fears for the animal. God, I remember praying to you, you who were the father of a son who was kinder. You are a man playing piano with childish fingers. I am a woman, a robin, a tiger. My friend is so sick. The chemo's been over months ago. Her day worships the way she used to be. She doesn't hear, is dizzy when she stands, eats the tofu of lamplight, tofu of coffee grounds, of snow, of sky, long and promising. My friend jiggles a butterfly pencil and opens the wine of her writing, the wine of cold tea. She makes sure her dogs are lean and happy, running for the ball, the special biscuit. I love the husky notes of the yellow-headed blackbird. This scout here all day, fenced to spruce, his song, a cactus with shoulders, sure as a mermaid's inside this ancient desert sea. His gold body and his gold hood and coal body like sun on Chicago. He calls from my clothesline, my red gate, my crabapple, here to look for water in our desert. This body, this light, this voice. There are no answers when I pray for more lemon balm, less starlight, a few straggly hollyhocks through days of diamond cutting heat. What comes from the calls of magpies? 2 sprigs of dill and 1 green hummingbird. What swirls in my mug? An ounce of dark chocolate. I have finally put out sun tea. I have lost the wild monkey flower. What days will not open? Those inside the rodeos of rainless clouds. What happened to my windows? They're etched with dust. A bright yellow bee lives one day on my screen and then dies holding on. I have bought a delphinium because I love the depth of its purple. I will conserve dishwater, pee, spit to water it. My neighbor says, what could be better than beans refried by someone else? After my mother dies, she whitens a scarf my mother crocheted for me, irons its stars wide open. She knows I'm across the street, motherless, fatherless. She says she doesn't believe in dinosaurs. She buys me a Bible. She can't stand up to roll tortillas anymore, her knees given out. Mornings, she has the TV on to Jimmy Swaggart. She told me she grew up in a pueblo and remembers the scent of sage. I bring her some from the desert, and she smells with her eyes closed. Who will remember the peace of aspen, the gentle shine of scorpions, the luck of sandstone, the lope of a mesa, the dinosaur footprint in the heavens of a coal mine? Who will remember the troll of bootlace, the hem of history, an atrocity every day? Who will remember the foot trail through bramble and fireweed, the next awkward step full of fragrance? Who will remember the gypsy mushrooms, the blink of sparrows, the flames of gamble oak, the butter, the brine? I believe there is nothing better than an apricot blossom, or my dog's white muzzle nudging my wrist to ask a question. Nothing better than a note that says, "I'll be back in an hour, my love." Or this pen that floats an oreship inside its small blue capsule, this pen that brings back a walk in wild stones between the bear's ears, or a trek on snowy miles to find icy fireworks in a Lake Superior cave. Nothing better than bumper stickers. "May peace bewitch you," or "There is no mad tofu disease. My son just sent from his red mailbox on Geranium Street in a priority envelope." There is nothing better than evolution right before our eyes in a deep Congo river that can easily, elephant fish that can easily pick their food among river pebbles with their elephant-like snouts. Nothing better than a petroglyph panel with its herd of deer and human figures like bee-body ghosts that float on a sandstone wall in Buckhorn Wash under the shine of desert varnish where water slips over a cliff in fingers of darkness. Tonight, I am on the porch under the snow of the Milky Way. I am far enough to believe Venus is a sign of hope, swaddled in its greenhouse gases. I have a gray feather as a bookmark, breath strips and toe warmers, a sponge my son says can breed disease in my kitchen. I have an eraser in the shape of a butterfly, that word I take apart to make era, air, sear, erase. On my desk, a Navajo woman carved from sandstone wears a nick at her shoulder, her green rug full of my dust. Tonight I will make bean enchiladas and doctor a can of adobo. I will drink from the peach glass etched in morning glories. I've bought a lily and sit next to it, breathing its drift, remembering lost Easters. I am waiting this week for the first sacred datura. What wisdom in the curve of a dog's paw, in its descending blossom, in its pads that need earth, in its run that forgets balance, in its transcendence towards us. Because aren't we moving towards happiness always, moving aside the shells and the orange peels, the tin cans and chamomile, moving aside the bills we have torn and finally paid up? My dog is brown with a white triangle at his throat. He sleeps under green fleece with an ancient vein that knows burrow, ears that have to believe in silence. He is unafraid when he sees a dagger of lightning, feels a world of thunder in his heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for just one question. So if John and Danielle want to come back on the screen, and I'll try and get out of this shaft of light. The question I want us to talk about very, very beautiful, very quickly is I was so struck by how beautifully all three of you evoked the natural world, the dying of the natural world, or at least the changing of the natural world. And one person wrote into the question, Utah seems to attract a number of really great poets. We are really great poets. So, but what is it about this landscape? And the three of you come from some of the most stunning landscape that the state has to offer. What do you think it is about the state its landscape and the ways in which it has affected or changed your poetry.
Wow.
The dissertation can begin now.
Okay. Uh, hmm. Well, a poem is like a landscape.
Hmm.
And so you're creating something, you're building something when you're writing a poem about something you're struck by. And I think in this landscape, especially, there are so many conflicts and challenges to write about. The idea of, the idea of drought, and
And the reality of drought too.
the reality of drought, and what that means to us as humans, I find to be challenging and difficult to write about, but something that I don't want to use the word inspire, but sparks something in me to want to write about that and to try to make it known to people who don't live here.
Yeah. John and Danielle, any thoughts about that?
So I typed a little short answer, but I kind of lucked into moving here. I had not heard of Cedar City, and then I found myself here, and I kind of instantly fell in love with it for a lot of the same reasons that Nancy talked about. When I was about to move out here, someone told me that Southern Utah just kind of gets into your bones, and I think that's the best way I can say it. It just kind of gets in your bones, and then comes out in your breath and your poems and everything else. So.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to put it, is that growing up in the East Coast and in Virginia, where I felt the springs were so sensual there, the spring season, and so there it's a scent that's very much a part of that landscape with the humidity, and coming here, it's very visual. And so you begin to feel like the sunrise, the sunsets mostly for me, twilight, those times of the day, the landscape changes, and it does become a part of you physically in a strange way. And I do think that when you live in an area such as this, you become aware, we have become more aware, obviously, of the limits of what the resources have to offer, that we are in a high desert. And yet there's a disconnect between, we have a little bit of, I think, an East Coast attitude, even if you're from the desert, that water is plentiful, green grass should be here. And instead, I think it's that, but I just feel like the landscape is beautiful and it's fragile. And I think that we're kind of reminded of that as well in different ways.
Well, I loved how all your poems were able to both celebrate and also investigate exactly the precarity and the beauty of this landscape that we all live in. I'm aware of time. I'm aware that it's Saturday night, and I'm also aware that it's National Poetry Month, which is here to kill us all. So I do want to stop for tonight, and again to thank you for such a beautiful way of closing this festival, or at least the core festival events just for this weekend. A huge thank you again to John, Danielle, and Nancy for this trio of readings, which I just found so mesmerizing and beautiful. I keep saying it, but it really is. But while our core virtual events are finished for the month, the Utah Poetry Festival continues on across the state in person and virtually. There are events across Southern Utah, writing workshops for the Prequel Conference online, a state high school poetry slam at the very end of the month, and far more. Tomorrow night, those in Salt Lake City can go to Queer Poetry Night at Under the Umbrella Books here. It's an open mic hour that starts at 7. And before I go, I want to say that this is my last Utah Poetry Festival since my term as Poet Laureate ends in June. And I want to send out a special thank you to the other poets and organizations who've been keeping this festival alive with me. So a huge thanks to Lisa Bickmore, Kimberly Johnson, Natasha Saye, and Jennifer Tong for not only originating this festival with me, but for continuing to organize and support it and to dream more ideas up for it. Thanks to the Utah Division of Arts and Museums and the Utah Humanities Council, to the Mellon Foundation and the Academy of American Poets for supporting both this festival and Mapping Literary Utah, web archive of Utah writers past and present. That's online If you are interested in Utah's literary scene, there's pretty much, that's the site for you. Truly, none of this could have been done without you. And I would also say none of this could have been done without all of you poets and readers out there in the audience tonight. It was my honor and my privilege to serve you in the literary community these past 5 years. And I very much look forward to seeing what the next Poet Laureate brings for us. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your April.
Thank you, Paisley.
Thank you so
you.
much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.